Today in Mark, we have stories about two women, a woman and a young girl who at 12 years old was basically in that time on the cusp of being a woman, of being of age to be married. And today, Jesus heals them. Jesus brings new life. We have first the young girl, Jairus' daughter, who is unnamed, but who is sick, on the verge of death. Jairus comes to Jesus and pleads with Jesus for help, and yet then comes this other woman in the middle of the crowd who has the audacity to reach out and touch Jesus' clothes. This woman had been bleeding for 12 years. In Jewish society, that would have meant that she was ritually unclean, which doesn't mean that she was sinful or bad or wrong, but that according to their ritual laws, she was set apart from the normal dealings of society. Hear that she had struggled. Can you imagine 12 years of bleeding? Many women struggle with irregular periods, and if you have had that, then you know. But if you haven't, you can imagine 12 years of blood. It's gruesome, and also the desperation she must have felt would have been immense. Chronic illness is like that. You're faced with desperation, and while maybe her community would have known who she was, if you were just passing her on the street, you wouldn't have been able to see necessarily the way that she suffered, right? Sometimes illness is like that. People suffer silently with illness, with disability, mental struggles. She must have once had money because she spent all her money searching for a cure. She interrupts Jesus moving about this crowd to touch him with this desperate faith and hope that maybe this will be the thing that will bring her relief. And then, after Jesus talks with her, she is made well. They speak, and here comes Jairus' people again. This story, by the way, this style, has a fancy literary name, interallocation, if any of you ever need to know that word. But we can also just call it a good old sandwich story, right? We start off with Jairus talking to Jesus. They are interrupted by the middle of the sandwich, this woman who had been bleeding, and then we go back to the other side of the bread, Jairus and his daughter. Jesus, by the time that he gets to Jairus' house, everyone says the girl is gone, she is dead. And yet Jesus says, no, she's just sleeping. I don't know about that approach to telling them. It reads a little dismissive of their pain, but still, he knows more than they do. He says, get up and give this girl something to eat. She must have been tired after her sickness. She needed some chicken noodle soup or some oatmeal or something, some toast and applesauce, bananas to get her well. Give her something to eat. So we have this sandwich healing story, this powerful person, Jairus, who was interrupted by this powerless woman, the bleeding woman, and Jesus stops and pays attention to her, speaks with her, right? It says that when she touched him, the power went out from him. So she was healed. He did not need to stop and speak with her, and yet he does. He takes the moment away from this urgent need to go and save the daughter, to deal with this woman who suffered so much. She then is healed, and as we've talked about in some of the other healing stories from Mark, This means not just that her physical ailments are healed and brought together, brought better, but that she is able to move from her state of ritual uncleanness to then being able to be part of the community again. She can connect. She can move from the isolation that her condition had put her in into a state of connection. And it is a young woman who had died. She died kind of right, as I said, at the cusp of becoming a woman. And she was 12 years old, right? As long a time as that other woman had been. Story had ended there, but by being given new life, she is able to connect, to move on in her story, to be older and perhaps have children, marry, and whatever else awaited her in the future. Jesus is the healer we sang earlier. I wrestle with these healing stories sometimes. Maybe you do too. If Jesus can heal people from their chronic disease, if Jesus can raise people from the dead, why doesn't he do it for me, for my loved ones? Jesus, throughout the Gospels, he doesn't really make a habit of raising people from the dead. There is this girl and Lazarus, and I could be wrong, but that's all that I can think of right now as people that he raises from the dead. It's also unusual that people would touch him and be healed. This was kind of a trope or an idea in the ancient world for other gods. It's not totally unusual, but people in the Gospels, aside from this woman, most of them aren't running around trying to lay their hands on Jesus. These stories, in some ways, are unique, one of a kind or two of a kind in the case of him raising the girl from the dead. But I think these stories and the other healing stories, as I've been trying to sort of get at in the past few weeks with Mark's gospel, it's not just about the healing, the physical healing, not just about the illness, but about this bigger picture of restoration and connection and community. We see, too, through these stories, important things about Jesus. As I said, that interruption in this story shows us Jesus taking the time to address a woman, which was unusual in and of itself, to address a woman, too, who was unclean. He takes the time and pauses and notices her, addresses her, notices and affirms her faith and her trust. These stories point us to a Jesus who brings us into new life, and sometimes that involves physical healing, sometimes it is restoration and reconnection. And today, we think about resurrection. We have the literal resurrection of the little girl from the dead, but we also have the woman who was bleeding and her resurrection into new life, a new chapter of her life free from suffering, or free of the suffering that she had known, at least. We've been talking about why church, informed by the ministry of Jesus, is it that we hope that we do here as a community? Why do we gather? Why do we bother being together? And today we pause and think about this. Why church? Because the church tells and lives the resurrection story. We don't have the power, like Jesus, to raise people from the literal dead or to heal. Some of us do, those of us who are trained in the medical world. But in general, most of us don't have the ability to bring healing to people's physical ailments just by touching them. Even our doctors and nurses don't have that. But what healing can our touch bring? What healing can our words bring when we say to people, take my hand and rise up and maybe even let's get something to eat. Blake and I watched the show Survivor. Anybody else a Survivor fan? It's goofy. I don't know. I'm not really into reality TV, but I've been watching some of it recently for reasons unknown to me. But I don't know. It's kind of comforting, right? You know, you don't have to invest much intellectual attention to it, and, you know, I don't know. It's something to watch. So we've been watching this season. I don't even know what season we're watching, but one of the survivors, one of the contestants, is this woman named Noelle. She's in her 20s, and she lost a leg in some of the years prior to the show. I mean, she was like 19 or so, and I forget the circumstances. But on the show, you know, she's got a prosthetic leg, and she tries so hard. And as I'm watching the show, I'm wondering, did they bother to design any of these challenges with her in mind? Because sometimes she gets like tangled, her leg, prosthetic leg, which is, it's got like a blade on the bottom. Have they designed this with her in mind? Because she's getting tangled in the net, like her leg's tangled. Anyway, in one of the episodes we watched recently, they've got this balance beam challenge, or it's part of the challenge. And how is someone with a prosthetic leg going to be able to balance? She can do all kinds of stuff, but you're watching her try and try and try again, and it just looks impossible. Finally, somehow though, I don't know even how, I couldn't do it, she makes it across. She's super behind everybody, she's sure to lose. All the other contestants are trying to throw a bag up on top of this like platform. It's like 20 feet up in the air. And they're still going by the time she gets there. And somehow on her first try, she lands her bag. She comes from behind and somehow wins. Now, this story isn't really a resurrection story. I wish that the show would have said at some point, we thought about this contestant when we accepted her onto the show, and we tried to design the challenges so that she could be included. They didn't address that I know of. So from a communal level, excuse me, I don't know that we've got total success. But in terms of watching Noelle and her struggle, we see something happen, that her stick-to-itiveness, her persistence, her determination brings a kind of healing. It's not that her disability goes away, but that she's going to figure it out no matter what. Society may not make a way for her, but she's going to make a way for herself, just like the bleeding woman. And maybe that moment when she wins, and it's one of the really good prizes too. It's the prize where they get their family letters from home. Anybody? You watch Survivor, you know. Anyway, and not everybody gets it. You get to take only a few of the other contestants with you, but she gets it. The most coveted reward in the show. It's not Jesus telling her that she has been made well, but by her own persistence and the goodness inside of her, she lives into this new moment. I'm sure the rest of her life is like that, and she talks about it on the show too. After she lost her leg, she became a Paralympian. She wasn't going to take what had happened to her sitting down. She was going to fight and live her life. As church, I hope that we are a community like that we do see the people around us in need of help and healing, in need of assistance and support, that we make new life and resurrection possible. In your bulletin, your paper bulletin today, if you have that, there is a space after the sermon for you to think about the people that you know who are in need of healing, body, mind, or soul. There's space for you to write their name down. I invite you, while we're listening to the music during the offering, while the plates are being passed, if you would like, write that name down. Writing things down makes things more concrete for us. After that question, you're then invited to think about what you could do to help that person, to reach out and touch their lives this week in some way. And the space there is for you to write down what you might do. It doesn't need to be big. It could be as simple as sending a text message. I'm thinking about you. Perhaps you are in need of healing. Feel free to write your own name down. You could write what you might do to reach out and touch Christ's clothes this week. God comes again and again among us, lifting us up out of our death and bringing us into new life, and we are invited to do the same. Amen.